Welcome to the Environmental Leadership Chronicles, a podcast brought to you by the California Association of Environmental Professionals. In this episode, I'm joined by co-host Corinne Bonine, and we feature Pedro Peterson. Pedro manages the local planning section at the California Air Resources Board, known as CARB, which provides resources and guidance to local governments on how to align land use and mobility policies with the state's climate, air quality, and equity commitments. He's previously led teams at CARB overseeing investments from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund on affordable housing and transportation. And before joining CARB, he was a senior planner with the City of San Francisco, an independent consultant for the Inter-American Development Bank in Washington, D.C. And Pedro completed his Ph.D. in City and Regional Planning at UC Berkeley. Join us on this podcast as we learn about Pedro's insight on leadership as an environmental professional and his career pathway to doing so. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy. Hi, I'm Jessa. My pronouns are she, her.
And hi, I'm Corinne. My pronouns are she, her.
And today we have Pedro Peterson, who is manager of the local planning section of the Sustainable Transportation Communities Division at CARB. Welcome, Pedro. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jessa, and thank you, Corinne. My name is Pedro Peterson, pronouns he, him. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today.
Yes, we agree. And so first things first, how are you connected to AEP?
Okay, so I am connected to AEP because I attended your annual conference in Lake Tahoe this spring. I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but I became manager of the local planning section, as you mentioned, about a year and a half ago. And my section was responsible for developing the local actions appendix to the latest scoping plan update. The scoping plan is the state's blueprint for meeting carbon neutrality goals by 2045, and our section developed this appendix that focused on how local governments can align some of their policies with the state's climate goals. And so we felt it was important to attend the AEP conference to be able to attend different panels and sort of have those sort of sidebar conversations that you always end up having at conferences like that, to just talk to practitioners about how they were engaging with the local actions appendix and the recommendations in there, how they're implementing those, and so I attended that conference for the first time in my career with a couple of colleagues who are members of AEP, fairly active members, and have attended that conference before. So it was really great to meet you all as there and get the invitation to join this podcast. So yeah, that's my connection is attending that conference and being in these conversations around CEQA and local planning and climate change.
That's great. I was going to say we were one of those sidebar conversations. So exactly. We benefited from your attendance as well. And Corinne was really nice on the state board for AEP, so did a lot of help in facilitating that conference, which is my first conference too. It was incredible. Highly shout out, plug for the conference, because
absolutely it was such a great conference. I learned so much and got into such interesting. Both the panels are really interesting, and just a really broad range of perspectives, and these more informal chats that we had across those few days were great, and beautiful setting too. Is in the Olympic Valley and in Lake Tahoe is beautiful. So I really appreciated being there.
And shameless plug for the 2024 conference.
Yes.
Anaheim. So we won't necessarily have snow-capped mountains, although there's the Matterhorn with Disneyland being walking. But definitely the conversations and networking and all of our, CEQA, GHG, NEPA, nerd talk definitely will occur next year as well.
Everybody should attend.
Oh, great. Done. We can wrap up. This is good. 3-minute advertisement for the conference. No, well, yeah, hopefully we'll see you there at the next one in the spring. So, well, let's get into this. So, talking more about, your experience in the environmental field, and you said your position is, relatively, new in relation to your career, about a year and a half in your current role. And so tell us how you really got started in the environmental industry. What drew you to it? What led you to it? And kind of just like the pathway, like where did you study it? What was your first job? Just talk us through your career path and how you got to your current position and your, interest in the environmental industry.
Sure. So my first job out of undergrad was actually, I studied political science as an undergraduate in Atlanta. And so my first job coming out of there was for a small environmental nonprofit in Atlanta called the Georgia Conservancy that was focused on land conservation in Georgia. And I worked in the sort of development, fundraising, grants management team over there, and started getting really drawn to this program that they had there called Blueprint for Successful Communities. So, they had these sort of more sort of natural and working lands preservation programs, but then they had this program that was focused on sort of smart growth principles. They would have these community planning workshops in different communities across Georgia, and I got really drawn to that, and it kind of really gave me this aha moment because the staff that were working in this program were largely planners, urban planners, and they had a really sort of diverse set of backgrounds. I kind of associated urban planning at the time with just architecture and design, and I was a political science major, didn't really see as something that was for me. But then just, seeing people with social science backgrounds doing this really interesting planning work, kind of sort of a light bulb went off in my head, and I decided that I wanted to, learn more. And I volunteered time at the time, for this program, and started thinking about maybe going to grad school for it. So this was, 2003, 2004. So I applied to a whole bunch of grad schools for planning, and ended up coming to Berkeley. So I did my master's in planning at Berkeley, and then sort of finished that and worked in consulting for a few years in San Francisco, and then went back to do a PhD in planning. So that's sort of, I can kind of get into my career more in a bit, but this question about why a career in the environmental profession, it's interesting. I feel like I have always been doing work in the environmental profession, even though like I didn't consider a lot of this planning work since I left the Georgia Conservancy to be specific about the environment. I feel like, especially in the last 10 years or so, I've been reflecting a lot on this, and how it probably makes less and less sense to think specifically about an environmental profession. I think we're in this climate crisis. I think all of us, working in, whether it's healthcare, education, labor, service sector, like I think we're all just trying to sort of adapt and engage with this reality of our climate crisis. So I was after my PhD, I went to work for the city of San Francisco on housing and community planning, it just became very clear to me that this was very much environmental work. Trying to promote more housing opportunities, close to transit in San Francisco, and the sort of the Bay Area is a place where the sort of cooler climate, and maybe a place where we want to expand housing opportunities for people to be able to live in as our state warms. And so I feel like I had been doing work in the environmental profession, and then just kind of came to realize that, like, oh no, I am actually an environmental professional now. And so so I started looking for opportunities to work on the sort of the intersection of housing and climate at the state level, and saw a couple of opportunities that seemed really interesting at CARB, and reached out to some folks and ended up coming here. I moved to Sacramento and started working at CARB almost exactly 5 years ago. And initially, I worked for a team that oversees the investments from the state's cap and trade auction proceeds. So the California Climate Investments Program, it's a sort of big range of program types, from affordable housing to clean transportation, land conservation, and all that. So I worked with that group for a few years, and then, as I mentioned, about a year and a half ago, I moved over to the local planning section that's focused, sort of coming back to my planning roots, working with local governments to align, particularly their sort of land use policies and decision making under CEQA with the state's climate goals. We also, I'll make a plug here. A couple of people in my section also implement a program called the Sustainable Transportation Equity Project, or STEP. It's a great project. We don't have a lot of funding, but with the funding that we do have, we make these grants of $8 to $10 million on average to disadvantaged communities across the state to implement mobility projects and expand access to mobility options, while also reducing vehicle miles traveled in those communities. And it's investments in needs that have been identified through a community planning processes. It's a really wonderful program. So that's also something that my team has been working on.
My first question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Corinne.
Just kind of right off the bat is, working, within and adjacent to, industries trying to provide solutions to the climate crisis can sometimes be exhausting and depressing. And it feels like we're just not getting there quick enough. But I thought the STEP program was a wonderful example. And I'm wondering if there's any other things you can point to that you and CARB are doing that should give us all hope.
Oh, yes. Great question. So STEP is actually part of a bigger suite of programs that it's called the Low Carbon Transportation Incentive Programs, that is largely overseen by this other division within CARB, but they make investments in everything from heavy duty vehicles, agricultural equipment. There's the well-known CVRP, Clean Vehicle Rebate Program, that provides incentives for consumers to purchase zero-emission vehicles. That is, it's been in the news. It's been sort of going through a transition to focus more, now that the EV market is a little bit more established, to focus more on lower income consumers, and then we have so close to STEP. There's a lot of coordination with another team that runs a program called Clean Mobility Options that's primarily focused on vehicle sharing and bike sharing programs. So they're smaller grants than the ones that I mentioned under STEP, but that are a great resource for communities that may be less resourced to put together a proposal to reduce VMT, for example. This program is a little bit sort of like a lower barrier to be able to create these car sharing programs, vehicle and bike sharing programs in disadvantaged communities. We have a whole bunch of regulations that I think are really helping to move the needle around clean transportation and buildings. The Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulation to essentially require vehicle sales by 2035 to be all electric. A different team in my division is working on building decarbonization and appliance standards efforts. So I feel like there's a lot of exciting things happening at CARB, across a spectrum of areas. So
that's great. And then your resume, as you told, is super impressive, and seems like you've been able to dabble in, advocacy work, NGO work, obviously public service. It sounds like a little bit of, private, maybe consulting work as well. For our listeners who, haven't had that widespread, kind of employment opportunities, would you mind giving kind of highs and lows of each one? Or what, maybe your favorite parts were, or, just share your experience having worked across that breadth of, employment types.
Sure. That's a great question. I've worked in consulting now in a couple of different capacities. So after I finished my master's program, I went to work for a sort of a municipal finance consulting firm called Seifel Consulting in San Francisco. I really enjoyed working there. I learned a ton. It became clear to me that I think consulting wasn't where I was meant to be. I think the sort of the constant turnover of projects and new clients, and you sort of like you kind of catch a project at a certain sort of slice, and you kind of only see that slice, and then the sort of pass it on to another consulting firm or to the client. I've enjoyed, since being in the public sector, being able to sort of take a program or a project and kind of be part of it through its life cycle. And the sort of engagement that you have with the communities where those projects are going, I think has been really valuable, and I've enjoyed that. I spent some time in academia doing my Ph.D. And that was wonderful. I also learned a lot doing that. But I really like being in sort of collaborative environments and working with other people. And I kind of felt like being a PhD student and trying to be an academic was a bit of a lonely process. I like the sort of collaborative environment. Even in this sort of hybrid telework environment where we're sort of collaborating over teams. For my team, I try to create some opportunities intentionally for us to get together and sort of see each other in person. But yeah, I like collaboration, and I like working with other people. So to me, the sort of government work is really well suited to that. So.
Yeah, I think that's great that you've had that diversity of experience where you get to learn, this is what I like. This is not for me, but for someone else. And I think it's so interesting to hear all the different sectors that you've been exposed to in your career. And I don't want to speak for you, but I can imagine it just makes you such a more well-rounded professional to be able to see these issues from different lenses and who's experiencing that and working in, these different sectors where you kind of had this aha moment of, wait, this is environmental. It's all environmental.
Yeah. I mean, I feel very fortunate to have been exposed to all of these, different potential career trajectories. I think one of the things that's been really valuable to me also, I work for state government now, but I manage something called the local planning section. And, before I came to CARB, I worked for local government. I worked for the city of San Francisco. The municipal finance work that I did was, consulting for local governments. And so I kind of feel like I, have worn those shoes before and understand some of the challenges. Obviously, the challenges facing San Francisco are different than challenges facing Los Angeles or Stockton or wherever. But I do think that there is a sort of a particular closeness when you're working in local government to the community and to those challenges, and you kind of get pulled in lots of different directions that hopefully in my current role I've been able to have a little bit of or have some empathy and understanding of what local government employees and planners are sort of dealing with when we are working on our recommendations and our incentive programs and all of that. So
yeah, so you could actually, when you're working with them, you're like, I've been in your shoes. I understand.
exactly. Yes, I've been
build that
yelled at a
rapport.
public meeting before, and yeah.
I can imagine. And kind of thinking too about again, the different levels of experience you've had in your career, and something that we're a big promoter of at AEP is mentorship. And so for the next generation or students looking to get into the field, do you have any advice as far as like mentorship or looking for the next opportunity in how people can get exposed to different types of industry or get their foot in the door at some of these places when they are just out of school or are just kind of starting to explore, what is out there as far as environmental adjacent or direct positions?
Yeah, I mean, I think mentorship is really, this sounds trite, but I think it's really critical. I think the programs that provide those opportunities, I have benefited from those immensely, and I try to, sort of make myself available to these programs. I attended, at the AP conference, there was a session on your internship program, and the interns and the graduates of that program seem like just incredibly bright people who may not have gotten into the environmental field, or may have gotten discouraged had they not been able to sort of plug into those networks. So my recommendation is just to look for those opportunities. Some will be better than others. So I imagine that the AAP internship program maybe it sounds as impressive as any others that I've heard, but I don't think there's anything to lose from just looking for those opportunities. And my recommendation to people who are developing those programs is to look for these kinds of examples, and provide opportunities that are paid. I think is really important, so that that they provide a real path for people who may not have other sources of income, or able to sort of get into debt to be able to participate, and just really lower the barrier to entry to allow for people with different backgrounds to be able to participate. And and at CARB, I've been, we have a mentorship program for junior staff that I've been a mentor in a couple of times, to sort of help get them into sort of a management track. We try to engage with different internship programs, or I know a couple of the sort of planning grad schools in California will have capstone projects that require sponsors. So we've looked for opportunities to be sponsors of those grad students that are trying to develop good research projects that are often quite helpful to us. That like provide some insights into questions that we're very much grappling with. And so I really love being a sort of a, I don't know if mentor is the right word, or a client to those kinds of projects. So I've done that a couple of times. I know there's a CARB. I've done that a couple of times. And so, if you are a graduate student listening to this, looking for opportunities in my area, feel free to reach out, and or reach out to folks that may be in your area, at CARB or other agencies. I know OPR, the Office of Planning and Research, has a fellows program too that is I've seen them produce really interesting research. So my advice is take advantage of these programs where you can. And if you're putting together one of those programs, pay your interns.
I love that. I think paid internships are so important. And, you really want to shed when I was your age, I did an unpaid internship. And it's just, especially in our efforts to make, AEP and the environmental profession in general more diverse, removing that barrier to entry, and, expecting that people participate in unpaid internships, or then have that internship experience when looking for full-time entry-level work.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important that we kind of shed that, model that did lead to limiting opportunities to people to participate in this profession.
Yeah.
I also want to go ahead.
I had this one experience when I was in college that was amazing. So my college was associated with the Carter Center, so President Carter's library, and his he and his wife's programs around the world to promote democracy and public health. And I got an internship there for a semester, and the only reason I was able to do it is because they allowed that internship that you basically got like credit, like school credit. And so then I didn't have to take that class. I could do that and I could keep working, which I had my own like job. And so I didn't have to give up any income. I could just like keep doing it. But then I wanted to stay on there, but they didn't have any paid internships, and I had like for the summer, and I had to drop off and go wait tables during the summer instead of doing that because I had to pay the bills, right? So, yeah, so I think that is very, very important to, especially, I mean, like young people are just facing so many challenges, including paying for college and paying for their education, that like donating their labor is very, very difficult. Even if there's a payoff down the road, like they still have to pay the bills.
Yep. Completely agree. And then, shameless plug for people listening who might be interested in mentorship opportunities, whether it's peer mentoring, one-on-one mentoring. We do have a couple programs available at AEP, so check out our website. We also previously taped a podcast describing our mentorship programs, and we are now, about 10% into our first mentorship cycle, where created peer mentoring groups and then also one-on-one mentor-mentee relationships. And we have, agendas that are, meant to be helpful to those people that can, be used each month. But we also, if you, are interested and missed out on that opportunity, we do have instructions on our website for how to find potential mentors using our online database. So check out our website. It should have my contact information, as well as our other co-chair Connie's. So if listeners have any questions about what you can do to use AEP to help you find mentorship, just let me know, and I'd love to point you in that direction.
I think something you said, Pedro, is so important is that, we talk a lot on this about mentorship and the AEP mentorship program. And the title of this podcast is the Environmental Leadership Chronicles, and we feature leaders in the environmental industry who are often in a position to set up these programs and to make the decisions on the internships being paid. And so while there is an individual responsibility and accountability to go out and find these opportunities, I think on us, on the leadership side, there is also the accountability to create the opportunities and to make them accessible. And like you said, accessible, and the fact of like, they're posted. There's a database, like with AEP, and there's resources. I'm sure CARB has, something, posted on their site. And in addition to making those decisions for it to be paid and to have other perks and to support those as leaders. So I think that's a really, really good point, that we not only do, the students and, early entry-level career individuals go out and find the opportunities, but we have the responsibility to create those opportunities ourselves and promote them. So that's my takeaway.
That's all great points.
I'm going to pivot a little bit back to something. So, one of the questions we like to ask guests are, what's your definition of sustainability and what does that involve evolving into? And something, that I think is interesting, it's in your title, right? When we introduced you, sustainable transportation communities is in your title. And so, I'm sure it's a word you hear a lot day to day. And I think it's something that we say, and I say we collectively, that, with not a lot of intent or like, so I'm wondering what your definition is of sustainability when you're talking about it and how you think about it in your role at CARB and, more broadly. What does that mean to you and where do you see it going?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start with a definition of sustainability that I probably hear the most, but I don't like very much, which is the sort of classic like Brundtland Commission that, sustainability means meeting the sort of society's current needs without compromising the needs of future generations. I kind of feel like that sort of sidesteps some important, critical issues of like resource distribution, environmental justice, sort of historic dispossession, and sort of how we got to this place today. I don't think a society that has this much inequality and injustice is sustainable in a meaningful sense. And so I think a better framing is one that I often hear public health professionals and advocates talk about in terms of environmental justice and access to opportunity, which is that sort of where you are born, like whether it's your zip code or your community or your country, shouldn't be a predictor of your sort of health outcomes and your educational opportunities and your overall happiness. I think, in order for that to be true, I think you need a sort of an underlying level of sort of respect and stewardship for the natural environment, and creating, opportunities for people to make a living, to be in nature, to have a good education, and to just sort of, just live their daily lives in dignity. I think that, to me, that even though it's not necessarily tied to sort of the natural environment, I think that it presupposes that that's something that is available to everyone. So so I would say my view of sustainability is one that is tied to just a baseline level of happiness and dignity and opportunity for everyone, with respect and stewardship for the natural environment.
I love that response because I'm sure I've mentioned this at some point before in the podcast, is that I really think of things as like Maslow's hierarchy. And so when you're talking about like the baseline, it's like the baseline being met and sustainability, because it's like if one of these things are missing, like security, food, clean air, clean water, like how can you advance into those other levels up in the hierarchy? So
Mm-hmm.
I've never actually thought about that though in connection with sustainability. So I'm gonna noodle on that a little bit. I really appreciate your definition.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. Something that we all, like you said, we kind of throw that word around, and we all assume that everybody has the same understanding of what that word means, but it's not necessarily true, and we may not even have a good grasp of it, but it's something that we need to kind of come back to.
Yeah. And I think, it's one of those words like green or eco that can get greenwashed quite a bit and lose some of its intention and meaning. And one of the reasons, actually the catalyst for this being a question that we like to ask, is years ago, another professional and I were discussing sustainability, and I can't remember us having a conversation. And I always think about sustainability as environmentally associated. And this person thought about it associated with financial sustainability. And we just kind of looked at each other and had this aha moment of like, well, we're not speaking the same language right now in what we're talking about. So I always find it interesting to hear the viewpoint, especially from those in the environmental profession. And so with you're doing a lot of work advancing these initiatives as far as like the state's initiatives and with the local communities and clean air and transportation. And so what is your dream for the environmental profession? And, as a leader and someone who's in a position to be influential and, very knowledgeable and educated, like where would you like to see the environmental profession go?
Yeah, so I, at the risk of the saying of when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. At the risk of like sounding like a hammer here around sort of planning and cities, I would like the environmental profession to sort of recognize cities as this sort of critical technology to allow for humans and society to live harmoniously with the rest of the natural world. I feel like cities are a way to efficiently. It allows us to be more connected to each other when we are sort of living and sharing public spaces, um, and allows us to preserve natural and working lands and habitat. And so I would like to sort of see sort of urbanists and environmentalists kind of like blend into sort of being one and the same. I think this shift is largely happening in many ways. I've listened to a couple of these podcasts about people speaking about, housing as a climate strategy, and thinking about CEQA as a way to promote infill and all that. So obviously this is very much happening, but I still think that there are parts of sort of the environmental movement that are still somewhat um, maybe pastoral in their approach in a way that I don't think is very compatible with our current challenges. And so um, I think that we should be embracing cities and what they can offer us, and what they can it's sort of as a way of sort of living richer lives, and also as a way of just reducing our footprint, uh, and be able to sort of preserve what's outside of them in a more meaningful way.
That's great. I love that. I'm motivated. I think about this, your response reminds me, we had a chat GPT contest. Excuse me. A generative AI podcast a couple weeks ago that we did. And it was like, listen, AI is not going away. So how do we work with it and not fight it? And like you're saying, it's like, we have cities, we have urbanization. How do we work with it instead of fighting and trying to undo all this that's already been done? How do we have a more sustainable future in collaboration with the urbanization that's inevitable and it's like already happened? So I think that's
I mean, and cities are just technology that has existed for thousands of years, and I would sometimes like read these articles about, like, is there some big tech innovation that can allow us to like solve the housing crisis or solve climate? It's just like we just, we have apartment buildings, and we have buses, and we, like, and bikes. Like, these things have existed for a long time, and they're just like staring us right in the face, and we just need to embrace that. And I think that I think that sometimes you see sort of these like cultural norms, explanations for like why people in the US can't, they need to live in the suburbs with their cars or whatever. And um, to me, that a lot of that's just tied to sort of our policy choices and the kinds of things that we subsidize as a society, and different societies have sort of shifted from car dependency to just living densely in cities, it seamlessly. And so it's something that if we in the United States or in California decided that we wanted to be serious about, I think we could very much do that.
And to your point, earlier about everything being interconnected, of course, that brings up housing affordability too. And where can people afford to live and live the way that they want to, or the way they've been programmed to think they want to? And needing to shift all of that is, part of the environmental profession, just like, the rest of kind of the more standard, jobs or employment that we've talked about.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this article I read, and it was about bus stops in LA not having shade and just this like baking heat, and how, hot it was getting. And so they installed, like, people were standing in the shade by like a lamppost or a street sign, which is like, this like 3 to 4 inch sliver, just for some relief. And so they installed these, posts with some kind of overhang, and it's like trees. Trees are the answer. Like,
Yeah,
we have shade.
it's amazing technology. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I think we'll get into our wrap up rapid five. Really
Okay.
appreciated the conversation with you, Pedro. A lot of salient points that have me thinking and hopeful too. So really appreciate that. All right. So what is your favorite daily habit?
My favorite daily habit is so I am 44. When I turned 40, I decided that I wanted to learn how to play the piano and spend my 40s learning how to play the piano. So I started taking lessons. This was shortly before the pandemic, and uh, and then during the pandemic, my teacher sort of switched to Zoom lessons, and I sort of kept kept going. And so I try to play a little bit of piano every day. I don't succeed, some days, but I try to sit down and for 15, 30 minutes a day, usually, before going to sleep, um, and play a little bit of piano.
I love that. That's wonderful.
What's your favorite piece you've learned how to play so far?
My favorite piece, there is a French composer named Eric Satie, and there's a couple of pieces by him that I learned. One is called a Gymnopédie #1, and the other one's called a Nocienne #1. So those two, you have probably heard them in movies before. They're just these like really beautiful, sort of you know, just kind of moody, kind of like I listen to those songs and I feel like I'm like walking on like a rainy Paris boulevard or something like that, like that. And so I knew and loved those songs before I started playing the piano. And then when I started playing, I'm just kind of learning from the very basic books. And then at some point I asked my teachers, like, could we try to learn these songs? And he said, sure. And so we did them, and it took me a while to learn each of them, but I did it, and it feels nice to be able to sit down and play those songs.
I love that. I wonder, you just gave me an idea. I'm going to see if I can ask our sound engineer if we can get the rights to that music and play it on
There you
our
go.
outro. I love that. How fun. Okay. What are 3 things you would bring to a deserted island?
My brother is a big fan of these survival shows, and he's always like telling me about like, well, so I probably will say a very wrong answer here in terms of being able to survive, but I would say a hammock, some fishing gear of some kind, and because that helps you get fish and also helps to pass the time, um, and then a very long book. And as I was thinking about this question, there's a book that I've been meaning to read that's very long, that I've read sort of chapters of in grad school, but I never read it from beginning to end. So if I was in a desert island, I would bring this book. It's called The Power Broker, the book about Robert Moses in New York. So I would bring The Power Broker, some fishing gear, and a hammock.
I love that. Very practical, but a little bit of, pleasure too.
There you go.
What is your favorite environmental policy?
So I don't know if this is my favorite environmental policy, but an environmental policy that I heard about recently that I thought was heard and read about that I thought was very cool, was that France recently banned these short flights between cities that have some adequate level of train service. So where you can sort of take the trains between those cities, France has banned flights between them, and I think that is brilliant. And I love taking the train. I've been to Europe a couple of times, and it's just, to not have to go through security and, sitting in the runway and like showing up 2 hours early and emitting a whole bunch of carbon into the atmosphere. Like it's just so much nicer to just be able to take the train and stare out the window and see the countryside, So I love that policy, which it's probably they probably thought of as partly an environmental policy, but partly just a sort of a transportation. Uh, yeah, so I like it a lot. Not my favorite one ever, but it's recent and it just caught my attention recently.
Very interesting. Yeah. I haven't heard of that one. I'll look it up. I too love a good train ride. What is your favorite flora or fauna?
I love grizzly bears. I When I was in college, I spent a couple of summers waiting tables in Montana, in Glacier National Park in Montana. One of those summers was the summer where I couldn't stay at the Carter Center, and I sort of was like, sort of before the summer started, and then my friend had gotten a job at a restaurant outside of Glacier Park, so I was just like, I'll just go with you and do that, and so I did that, and on your hikes there, you often will see grizzlies sort of like out in the distance, and I just really love sort of watching them interact, and they have this. It almost, they seem kind of human-like in the way that they kind of interact with each other, and they'll just like sit there and like eat huckleberries for hours, and they just seem very it's all very kind of slow and deliberate, and I just have this fondness for grizzly bears. So
that's really cool. I love that. I just picture like the bear just sitting there eating huckleberries, socially just hanging out, having a nice day by the river. Okay, finish this sentence. Wouldn't it be cool if?
Wouldn't it be cool if everyone could get around safely and conveniently without needing a car?
Yes.
I'm glad you agree with me, Jessa.
Well, thank you so much, Pedro. Again, this is wonderful. We really enjoy you coming and speaking with us and sharing your insight and your experience, and look forward to sharing this with our audience.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor. It's the first time I've ever been on the podcast, so I appreciate the invitation and the great conversation.
You nailed it. Did great.
And Eric Satie will see us off into the closing credits here.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to be updated when new episodes are released, and leave us a review to let us know what you think. It also really helps us to share the podcast with others who may enjoy learning about the environmental industry. If you want to submit a shout out or any feedback, please send an email or voice memo to podcast@califaep.org. The email again is podcast with an S, podcast@califaep.org.